Oh hi, I'm the Heretic. Ethics is a frequent topic on this channel, what it means, how it applies today, and the various flaws with the mainstream understanding of ethics. In a nutshell, ethics are a social study that observes how actions are conclusions requiring justification, particularly important when interpersonal conflict requires resolution absent government coercion. This, in contrast to the mainstream understanding mentioned earlier, where ethics are claimed to be just policy prescriptions, sets of norms imposed from the top down. The mainstream understanding of ethics is presuppositional. It does not justify how their arbiters gain the power to impose ethics in the first place, nor does it explain their methodology. When challenged, appeals simply fall into either circular reasoning or infinite regress, usually constructed around mythologies like authority, that bestow certain humans with the supernatural power to state a conclusion without having to explain it and then claiming it to be knowledge. Or, to put it more concretely, to act without causality. It's like trying to explain how rain falls. Anyone can observe that water is moving from the sky to the ground, but without gravity as an explanation, nobody really knows why. In this metaphor, ethics is gravity. In the absence of this justification, the conclusion being presented cannot be cited to be knowledge, merely one's personal opinions or preferences, no more or less valid than any competing conclusion. How one can act without causation or reason is something that cannot be claimed. A common dodge of this problem is claiming acting unethically invalidates ethics, that someone violating their rights, remember that rights are entailed by ethics, or making them unable to defend their rights is the same as not having rights or ethics at all. This would certainly be valid if ethics and rights were normative, since rights that are bestowed can also be taken away. However, the argument does nothing to invalidate ethics as a social science. It only demonstrates capacity to inhibit people's defense of their rights. Negation of rights would entail people's ability to exercise or defend them would be completely impossible, while at the same time demonstrating a divergence between conclusions and the reasons for said conclusions. The Aristotelian approach to ethics has the best explanation as to why it is that certain behaviors, namely theft, rape, murder, and kidnapping, are conclusions. Namely, a claim to dominion over another person cannot be logically justified conceptually. Attempts to fall into circular reasoning or infinite regress as mentioned earlier. A murderer contradicts their own right to life by violating somebody else's through the act of murder, for instance, which violates the consistency principle, one of the first principles of logic and reason. Knowing this, we have a priori knowledge for how justice will be achieved absent the government's monopoly claim to justice. We have more videos going to this topic in more detail, as well as others planned, but for the purposes of this discussion, this will suffice. Using this framework, we can observe governments and their claims, namely their claim to ownership of other people's property through taxation, and to empower its agents to murder through its monopoly on arbitration and the conflict of interest said monopoly creates. While by no means a comprehensive list of government actions, we can conclude that the core functions of the state that it must do by merely existing is impose and collect taxes and wage war. These are conceptually invalid, and as the state must do these things, the existence of the state is unjust. Any claim that the state is necessary to protect people's rights is to be regarded as similarly laughable. For those of you who say that all states are not necessarily in a state of war at all times, what happens if you refuse to pay taxes? The state uses armed thugs to escalate force against you until you either comply or die. You're damn right they're at war against you. This is all well and good, but what does anything I just said have to do with morality? Isn't that the topic of the video? Yes it is, and yes it does. Morality, broadly defined, is how people individually apply ethics in their day-to-day lives. So, naturally, we cannot discuss morality without first going into ethics, since the latter entails the former. Ethics are observations, if you recall. They make no ought claims about behavior, either to or not to do something. That's where morality comes in. Now, just to clarify, morality is not normative either. It is an emergent property of interpersonal interaction. The how is part of the reason why we never made a video about morality sooner, as the topic veers uncomfortably close to subjectivism. Perhaps it would work best if I provided an example of morality in action and how one applies it to their lives. Since I'm sure a reasonable number of people have already tuned out of this video right now as they're playing a video game with this video as audio in the background, let me just say this. Animal cruelty is not unethical. Now that I got your attention, allow me to explain. Animals don't have rights. By animals, I mean creatures that do not demonstrate self-ownership. Appropriating them as property entails their owner to make use of them however they see fit, including disposal. It goes without saying that torturing your neighbor's cat is unethical, or a farmer's cattle, but vandalism constitutes trespass, a violation of property rights. Torturing your own cat? Completely ethical. It's no less ethical to smash your plate. Now, I imagine most of you find that absolutely disgusting. How can you say such a thing, heretic? You can't compare living creatures to kitchenware. Animal cruelty is wrong. Is it, though? Even ignoring the ambiguity of the terminology, at what threshold treatment of animals becomes cruel is arbitrarily defined. For example, if one owns the animal, or homesteaded an unowned animal, how is it unethical to dispose of one's own property? It's no less different than destroying a plate by filing it down into powder. If one wishes to be unnecessarily tedious in their property's disposal, why can't they? You could argue that it is not the most efficient use of those resources, but that's independent of the ethical truth of the matter. The claim that animal cruelty is unethical cannot be justified. Even so, I'm quite certain that you, dear viewer, would still not want to be needlessly cruel to animals. Furthermore, you wouldn't want to associate with someone who tortures animals for fun either. In that particular instance, you're just exercising your own autonomy and freedom of association to say screw you to people whose behavior you find abhorrent. Even if you're completely okay with animal cruelty, then you can at least empathize with this anti-animal cruelty taboo. You see, just because something is ethical doesn't mean you have to participate in it or even tolerate it. This is morality, a set of preferences for behaviors you apply for both yourself and those around you. But that's actually the tough thing about morality, is that they're preferences. The claim that animal cruelty is wrong is equally as valid as animal cruelty is okay. They are equal insofar as neither are factually correct conclusions. How one comes to one's preference over another is another matter entirely. People can come to them on their own, through evaluation of their circumstances, and decide that living with people who torture animals is not in their interests. And just so we're clear, and so people don't take this out of context, I do find animal cruelty horrendous, and I would not voluntarily associate with people who practice it. I find it abhorrent and absolutely disgusting. When the behavior of a person conflicts with the morality of another, the latter could regard the former as immoral. As immoral behavior creates no victims, no claim rights in restitution can be made, as no actual cost was incurred, nor were rights violated. However, I alluded to disassociation earlier, and nothing prevents moral agents from using morality to inform their decision-making, especially in regards to who they associate with. Don't believe me? Well, would you want to do business with a known animal abuser? However, there are other things that inform our behavioral preferences. Culture, for one thing. Culture, if you recall, is the sum of human action. Note that culture is not a single hegemonic thing in a population and external to it, but yet another emergent property of any sufficiently developed connection between people. Regions, towns, neighborhoods, and even households have their own culture. Just think about all the inside jokes shared between you, your friends, and your family, and you'll see what I mean. These cultures produce their own expectations of behavior. Since interaction is necessary for people to achieve their most highly valued preferences, it creates an economic incentive for respecting the morality of those they interact with. Not smoking in a restaurant where the owner forbids smoking, for example. If you yourself do not smoke, then this is a non-issue. What happens when others' morality is not respected? Well, I alluded to it earlier. Ostracism. If someone is doing things you personally find immoral, like, say, torturing animals, you can tell them to go away. Refuse to do business with them. While this may seem mild at worst, think of what happens to a person if their behavior is so universally repulsive that nobody wants anything to do with them at all. It's going to be hard for them to get food, water, people to hire him, or clients to sell their goods to. It would be quite lonely, wouldn't it? Their ability to participate in society and trade for resources that they do not specialize in basically reduced to zero. Not to mention, operating economically would be incredibly difficult. Immorality imposes a direct cost to maintaining current behavioral habits by making paying for their current lifestyle substantially more difficult. This leaves immoral people with a few choices should they want to change their situation. They could convince everyone to adopt their own morals, but that would be quite difficult, as I'm sure you imagine. They can also alter their own behavior to conform to the morality of the culture, relocate somewhere else to where their behavior is much more tolerated, or become completely self-sufficient and disconnect one's wants from those who find one's behavior immoral. But you'll notice something if you dig a little deeper. All those options involve a culture maintaining itself and encouraging those participating with it, if not necessarily in it, to act morally, either encouraging conformity or those who refuse to do so relocating to somewhere where they are more welcome. Even complete self-sufficiency constitutes an exile of sorts, as the immoral actor would no longer associate with the culture in question. Do you see what's going on here? We've identified a way for cultures to maintain themselves without any coercion or violence necessary by a monopoly on arbitration. Pay attention, nationalists! The culture's ability to defend and maintain itself is an emergent property of people exercising their free association. The extent to which the state prevents people from freely associating, such as through open border or closed border policies, COVID lockdowns, etc., is the extent to which the state is an active hindrance on culture and morality, regardless of the intent of those using or seeking to use the state. In the context of morality, they assume that unethical behavior is justified by morality. This cannot be true, as morals are entailed by ethics. Morals that legitimize aggression and violations of self-ownership require justification, which cannot be done as stated earlier. Simply citing morality proves nothing. Nationalists trying to use state violence to preserve morality and protect culture don't understand morality or culture and will impede the emergence of both by creating a monopoly on arbitration external to them to prescribe their preferences for moral behaviors as well as the tolerance level for deviation thereof. By contrast, ethics doesn't say anything about how people behave. Any state skeptic philosophy that prescribes moral behavior cannot be anarchist. Did you hear that, Hans Hermann Hoppe? Anarchism does not prescribe morality. Anyways, the fact that anarchism does not prescribe behavior means that any preference for ethical behavior is perfectly legitimate. Thus, in an anarchist society, there will be a great variety of cultures, customs, norms, traditions, what have you. More importantly, thanks to technology that already exists and yet to come, it will be much easier for people to connect with cultures they identify with and disassociate from rivalrous ones. As more production is moved to the internet, this enables more people to maintain their productivity and therefore their earnings theoretically anywhere in the world that is connected to the internet. What that means is that geography will have diminishing importance economically. Instead, people will associate on the basis of shared values and culture. People who hate smoking, for instance, can live with other non-smokers, while people who can't live without at least one Cuban cigar will probably set up a colony in Cuba. These cultures will continue to network economically since trade is in their mutual best interest, and in the absence of the state, well, everyone wins. Now, before I wrap up the video, let's clarify a few misconceptions. Is morality objective or subjective? If objective means a singular conclusion is true regardless of circumstance, and subjective is defined as all conclusions are equally true or false, then all conclusions about morality are true as long as they do not conflict with ethics. All moral claims that conflict with ethics are false. As such, I don't call morality objective or subjective. I have no problem with ethics, but what if I don't have any morals? That would honestly surprise me. There has to be ways in which you alter your behavior or demand others do the same, even if you're not consciously aware of it. But even if you are correct, and what observation ethics make about actions that can or cannot be justified is the absolute maximum for you, well, great. As long as you're not harming anyone, you do you. Questions, comments, critique? What do you think about morality? Did you learn anything? Leave a comment below. Like, share, and subscribe to become a heretic today.